My son used the $30,000 I gave him for a family vacation to Hawaii, then looked me straight in the eye at the airport and told me he forgot to buy my ticket. He said it with the same casual tone someone might use to say they forgot to pick up a gallon of milk. The words hit me harder than a slap. I had spent months planning this trip, telling myself it would be a memory for the family, something to carry us through the years ahead. But in that moment, he made it clear I wasn't part of the picture. He didn't stumble. He didn't apologize. He spoke with the cool confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And then, he said the words that cut even deeper. Just go home. What he didn't realize is that home isn't just four walls. Home is where you build your life, where you keep the lessons you've learned, and where you keep the number of a very good lawyer. He thought he was sending me back to an empty house defeated. In truth, he was sending me back to the place where I still had power. By the time his plane touched down in paradise sipping Mai Tais on my money, I had already made a call that would turn their tropical dream into a nightmare. I can still remember the way people in line looked at me that day. A young woman with her child gave me a glance full of pity, as if she had just witnessed a man push his mother out into the street. A couple whispered, "Did he really say that to her?" Their voices carried more sting than even his words. My hands shook on the handle of my suitcase. My heart ached, but my mind began to sharpen. I knew I couldn't let this pass. I knew I couldn't keep pretending that his greed was just a phase. I rolled my suitcase out of that airport, each step heavier than the last, but beneath the weight of humiliation, there was something else, a spark of resolve. They thought they had written me out, left me behind while they basked in the Hawaiian sun. They thought I would just sit at home nursing my wounds. But they forgot something I had been underestimated my whole life, and every time I found a way to turn the tables. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Because what happened next wasn't just about $30,000. It was about dignity, about legacy, about drawing a line when your own child decides your love is a bottomless wallet. And believe me when I drew that line, the consequences shook my family to its core. When I left that airport, I walked slowly toward the parking lot. My suitcase wheels rattled on the concrete louder than my own heartbeat. People stared, some in pity, some in disbelief. I didn't cry. Not there. My tears had no place among strangers. Instead, I felt a strange calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard like it held the answers. $30,000. My savings. My trust. All spent so they could sip cocktails on a beach while I was left with humiliation. I could almost hear the ocean waves, not because I was there, but because I had paid for them to be there. That thought cut deeper than anything. The first call I made wasn't to a friend or to my sister, or even to my pastor. It was to my lawyer. His name lit up my phone like a lifeline. When he answered, I said only one sentence. Freeze everything tied to the family trust effective immediately. My voice didn't shake. In that moment, I wasn't a mother or a victim. I was a woman protecting what was left of her dignity. He asked, "What happened?" I told him briefly, and he sighed. The heavy kind of sigh a man gives when he's heard this story too many times, just with different names. Greed, betrayal, family tearing at itself for money, it was nothing new to him. But for me, it was my whole world collapsing. As I drove home, the radio played cheerful songs about love and summer skies. I turned it off. Silence suited me better. The silence gave me space to think, to plan to let the anger settle into something sharper resolve. I realized that I had been ignoring signs for years. The missed repayments, the constant excuses, the way he and his wife always had new clothes, new gadgets while I clipped coupons. It had been building up to this moment. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. It wasn't just bricks and windows anymore. It was a fortress, the only place left where I had control. I unlocked the door, set down my suitcase, and walked straight to my desk. I pulled out every file, every receipt, every bank statement. I laid them out like puzzle pieces. I wasn't just going to react, I was going to build a case. That night, sleep never came. I paced the kitchen, the floor cool under my bare feet. I replayed his voice in my head over and over, "Go home." Each time it echoed, I felt my spine straighten a little more. They thought they had silenced me. Instead, they had handed me the script for their downfall. Around midnight, I brewed coffee. The bitterness steadied me. I opened my laptop and typed an email to my lawyer subject line, urgent documentation. In the body, I wrote, attached are the last 6 months of transfers, receipts, and notes. Cross-check with trust activity. Build me a wall so high they'll never climb over it again. I pressed send. My hands stopped trembling. By dawn, I stood at my window watching the sun rise. Birds chirped, the world went on, but inside me something had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that airport with a hopeful smile. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who finally understood that sometimes love has to take a back seat to survival. The trip had barely begun for them, but so had mine. And mine wasn't about beaches or sunsets. Mine was about justice. I wasn't blind. That's the truth I had to admit as I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, stacks of receipts spread around me. My son's betrayal at the airport hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the final straw after years of excuses, debts, and disappointments I kept brushing aside because he was my child. A mother's heart can forgive almost anything until it can't. I remembered the first time he asked for money. He had that boyish grin, the same one he used when he was 10 and wanted a second scoop of ice cream. Only now he was 26, and instead of ice cream, it was $10,000 for a can't-miss business opportunity. He promised me it was a sure thing. I didn't even ask for details. I wired the money the same day. Weeks later, all I got was silence. When I pressed him, he mumbled something about market shifts and bad timing. I let it go. Then came the credit card bills. He and his wife Lily always had the newest phones, designer clothes dinners at restaurants where I'd never set foot. He'd say, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll pay it back," but the payments never came. Each month I covered the minimum, telling myself he just needed time. Love makes you gullible. One night I found an overdue notice stuffed in my mailbox. It was from the bank about a loan I never signed. My hands shook as I read the details, co-signed by me with his signature scrawled next to mine. I confronted him the next morning. He didn't even deny it. He just shrugged and said, "I knew you'd want to help." That should have been the moment I drew the line. But I didn't. I swallowed my anger, told myself he was young and still figuring out life. But the signs kept stacking. The Christmas when I gave him a check to help with his mortgage, he thanked me, kissed my cheek, and then, not even an hour later, I overheard him telling Lily they could finally book their European cruise. My gift had never been about the mortgage. It had been about champagne on a deck somewhere in the Mediterranean. And now $30,000. He hadn't asked this time. He had insisted. "Mom, it's a family vacation. You'll love Hawaii. We'll all be together." His voice had that practiced warmth, the kind that sounds like love until you scratch the surface and find calculation. I wired the money because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe finally we'd have a memory together that wasn't tainted by lies. Instead, I got humiliated at the airport. As I stared at the papers on my table, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. Every check I'd written, every apology I'd accepted, every time I looked the other way, it had all led here, to that single sentence at the boarding gate. Go home. The flashbacks blurred together, each one another stitch in a wound I'd been too blind to close. A graduation party where I bought the suit he claimed he paid for. A hospital bill I covered while he bragged online about a new car. A Thanksgiving dinner where he sat at the head of the table carving turkey like a king while I worked in the kitchen alone. It was never just about the money. It was about being erased, used, and discarded. By the time the sun rose, I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was rewriting. Each betrayal wasn't just a memory, it was evidence. A record, a trail. And this time, I wouldn't ignore it. I wouldn't forgive it away. Because the truth is, love has boundaries. And once they're crossed, a mother stops being a safety net and starts being something else entirely, an adversary. The house was quiet that morning, but inside me there was nothing calm. I moved like a machine, pulling out old folders, opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to my fingers, but I didn't care. Every paper I touched was a reminder of how many chances I'd given him. Somewhere in that mess I knew lay the proof of what he had become. The first real clue came when I opened a folder marked Bank Miscellaneous. Inside were copies of wire transfers I had made over the past year. I traced each line with my finger, the numbers glowing like scars. 10,000, 5,000, 12,000, again and again, each one with his name attached. But then something caught my eye. A transfer I didn't remember approving $15,000 drawn from the family trust, not my personal account. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. That trust had strict limits protections built in when my husband was alive. Only I and the trustee had access. For my son to pull money from it, he would have needed authorization. My authorization. I flipped to the last page, and there it was, my signature. Only it wasn't mine. The loop of the Y in my name was too sharp, the slant of the letters wrong. It was a forgery. I sat back in my chair, the paper trembling in my hand. Forgery wasn't just betrayal. It was crime. For a moment, I felt sick. This wasn't about greed anymore. It was about violation. He had taken my name, my identity, and twisted it into a tool for his own gain. I made 3 copies immediately, one for my lawyer, one for the bank, one for myself. Then I locked the original in my desk drawer. My hands stopped shaking. For the first time since the airport, I felt steady. I wasn't powerless. The more I dug, the more the story unraveled. Credit card statements showed dinners in restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel bookings in cities he claimed he'd never visited, cash withdrawals suspiciously timed right after my deposits. Each discovery was a cut, but together they formed a weapon. By noon, my dining table was covered in papers arranged in neat stacks. To anyone else, it might have looked like clutter, but to me, it was order and accounting of lies. And in the middle of it all, that forged signature glared up at me like a brand. I took a break only once, standing at the sink with a glass of water staring out the window at my garden. The roses I had planted last spring bent gently in the breeze. I thought of all the years I had poured into nurturing my family, the same way, watering, pruning, waiting for blossoms that never came. Some plants are simply too diseased to save. When the phone rang, I didn't jump. I knew who it was. My lawyer's voice was calm, measured, but even he couldn't hide the edge in his tone when I told him about the forged document. This changes everything, he said. Forgery, unauthorized withdrawals, misappropriation of trust funds. This isn't just civil. This could be criminal. The word hung in the air. Criminal. My son. My flesh and blood. The boy I had once held in my arms, now reduced to a case file, a suspect. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it settle. For years, I had carried his mistakes on my shoulders, thinking it was my duty as a mother. But this was different. This was him stealing my very name to prop up his lies. When I opened my eyes, I no longer saw papers. I saw leverage, evidence, power. He thought he had written me out of the story, left me stranded at that airport. But the truth was here in black ink on white paper. And truth has teeth. The forged transfer was the spark, but a spark alone doesn't bring down a house. You need kindling wood oxygen. And I had all 3 sitting right in front of me. Still, I knew better than to think I could fight this battle alone. Family betrayal is one thing. Legal warfare is another. If I was going to bring my son and his wife to account, I needed allies. The first was obvious, my lawyer David. He'd handled my husband's estate years earlier, a man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. When I walked into his office with a file box under my arm, he didn't greet me with small talk. He simply cleared his desk and said, "Show me." For the next hour, I laid everything out: statements, receipts, transfers, copies of that forged signature. He leaned back, adjusting his glasses, and shook his head slowly. "You've been more patient than most. Too patient. But this—" He tapped the forged document. "This is the thread. Pull it, and the whole thing unravels." "What do we do?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside, I felt like a soldier asking for marching orders. "First, we secure the trust. I'll file immediate motions to freeze any pending distributions. Second, we notify the bank of suspected forgery. That forces them to investigate. And third," he looked me dead in the eye, "we build a timeline. A story backed by paper and dates that no judge, no jury, no relative can ignore." It was the first time in months I felt like I wasn't drowning. Still, legal strategy wasn't enough. I needed facts unfiltered, undeniable. That's where my second ally came in, Claire, an old friend who had become a private investigator after retiring from the police force. We'd lost touch over the years, but when I called, her voice still carried that mix of warmth and steel. "What did he do?" she asked. No hesitation, no judgment, just certainty that I wouldn't be calling unless it was serious. I told her everything. She whistled softly. "Forgery, misuse of funds, family trust. Messy, but I'll dig." Within a week, Claire had gathered what I couldn't hotel surveillance stills of my son and Lily. During weekends, they claimed to be working late. Credit card records showing purchases at jewelry stores, while Lily flaunted new necklaces online under the caption "self-made." Even a photo of my signature from a cashier's check compared against the forged one side by side, the differences glaring. The evidence piled up like bricks, and with David's legal mind and Claire's investigative reach, I finally felt the ground under me solidify. No longer just a mother piecing together scraps, I was part of a team. One night, sitting at my dining table surrounded by folders, I felt the weight of gratitude. Not for my son, he had stripped that away, but for the people who stepped in when blood turned to poison. Allies not by blood, but by choice. And yet the hardest part wasn't collecting evidence. It was facing the truth in black and white, seeing the receipts for hotel suites when he told me he couldn't afford his mortgage, the flight tickets to Las Vegas bought the same week I covered his credit card bill. Lies stacked on lies until I wondered if I had ever known the man at all. But every pang of sorrow hardened into resolve. I wasn't gathering this for revenge, not in the petty sense. I was gathering it because I had spent too many years erasing my own boundaries. Now the line was carved in stone. When David called late one evening, his voice carried a new edge. "We're ready. With what Claire found in your documents, we have enough to move forward legally. But I'll warn you, once this starts, there's no going back. Families don't forgive lawsuits." "I know," I said quietly, staring at the stacks of paper, the proof of years of manipulation. "But families also don't survive lies like this, at least not mine." In that moment, I felt a strange calm again, the same calm I'd felt at the airport after the humiliation. Not resignation, clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking why and start deciding what comes next. The case was no longer just an idea. It was real breathing waiting for the first strike. And I was ready to swing. The summons went out on a Thursday. By Friday morning, my son was on my doorstep. He didn't knock softly. He pounded his fist, rattling the frame. I opened the door, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. His face was red, his jaw tight, the same expression he used to get when he lost as a child, except this time the stakes were far higher. "Mom!" he snapped, pushing past me into the hallway. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I closed the door behind him, steady, unflinching. "Protecting what's mine." He spun around, eyes blazing. "You froze the trust. Do you have any idea what you've done? That money isn't just for you, it's for all of us, for family." The word family tasted bitter coming from his lips. I thought of the forged signature of the $15,000 he siphoned without a second thought. I thought of the airport of his voice telling me to go home. "Family," I said quietly. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't drain accounts behind closed doors. Family doesn't abandon the one who made the vacation possible." For a moment, I saw his mask slip. His eyes darted just enough to tell me he knew I had proof. Then his anger doubled. "Lily and we needed that money. You've always had enough. Why can't you just let us live?" I held up a folder I had left on the table, fat with copies. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. "Because this isn't living. This is stealing." He went pale. His eyes flicked to the folder as if it were a loaded gun. "You don't understand," he muttered, suddenly softer. "We had plans, big ones, investments. You could have been part of it. By losing everything," my voice sharpened, "by watching you throw away my husband's legacy. No, not this time." His shoulders stiffened. "So, what, you're going to drag your own son into court, ruin my life? You've done a good enough job of that yourself," I said. "I'm just refusing to be your accomplice." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between us. Then he laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You think a judge will believe you over me? I'll tell them you're confused, that you signed everything. Who do you think they'll side with, an old woman or her own child?" I walked to the table and slid the forged signature across the wood toward him. Right beside it, I laid Claire's photo comparison, the one showing my real signature against his forgery. They'll side with the evidence, I said. He didn't touch the papers, his jaw clenched, his breathing ragged. Finally, he slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the glasses. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," I said evenly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I regret waiting this long." He stormed out the door, slamming so hard the walls shook. I stood there in the quiet afterward, my pulse hammering, but my resolve sharper than ever. The confrontation hadn't broken me, it had clarified everything. He wasn't going to back down, not willingly, which meant the fight ahead would be brutal. That evening, I called David and told him what had happened. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Good. Let him rant. The more emotional he gets, the sloppier his moves will be. We want him desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. The house creaked around me, the air heavy. I thought about my son's face, the boy I once knew, and the man he had become. Somewhere along the line, I had lost him. Or maybe I never really had him. But as much as it broke me, I knew one truth: this wasn't about saving him anymore. This was about saving myself. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in their kitchen that smelled of garlic and fresh basil. Lily was plating pasta while my son leaned against the counter scrolling his phone like nothing in the world could touch him. I had called earlier asking if we could talk. He'd agreed too casually, the way a man agrees to swat a fly. I carried a folder tucked under my arm. Not the whole case, just enough. Enough to remind him that I wasn't the mother who once smiled through every excuse. He looked up when I walked in. "Mom, didn't expect you so soon." His tone was flat, but his eyes flickered to the folder. He noticed. "Good. I thought we should clear the air," I said, taking a seat at the table without waiting for an invitation. Lily set down the pasta and crossed her arms, her smirk already in place. "About what my son asked." "Hawaii, it was a misunderstanding." "No." My voice cut sharper than I intended. "Not about Hawaii. About this." I slid the copy of the forged transfer across the table. He blinked slow, calculating. Lily's smirk faltered. "What's this?" she asked. "A withdrawal from the family trust," I said, "with my signature, only it's not mine." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. He picked up the paper, studied it, then set it down. "You must be mistaken." "Don't insult me," I said. "You forged my name." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he tried to flip the script. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it is. We needed help. You've always helped. Why start drawing lines now?" Because the lines weren't drawn in ink anymore. They were carved in betrayal. I pulled another sheet from the folder, hotel receipts, matched against dates he told me he was working late. Claire's photos sat stapled to the corner, his face in a hotel lobby, Lily's laugh frozen beside him. I laid it next to the forged transfer. His hand twitched. Lily's eyes darted, but she said nothing. "This isn't help," I said. "This is theft. From me, from the trust your father built, from the legacy you were supposed to honor. You're blowing this out of proportion," he snapped, color rising in his cheeks. "Families cover for each other. That's what loyalty is." "Loyalty." My voice cracked, but not with weakness, with fury. "Loyalty is what I gave you when I paid your debts, your bills, your fantasies, and this is how you repaid me, by erasing me from my own life." For the first time, he looked rattled. His bravado slipped, and behind it, I saw the boy he once was, the one who asked for ice cream with wide eyes. But that boy was gone. All that remained was a man who thought love was a bank account. Lily stepped in, then, her tone sharp. "What do you even want?" "More money, a share of the trip back, because if this is about inheritance, we can." I turned on her. "This is about fraud, about forgery, about respect that never existed in this house. And you," I pointed at her, "you've played your part well. But I have every receipt, every record, every lie. And when this goes to court, your laughter won't save you." The room went silent. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to vanish. Finally, my son pushed back from the table, the chair legs screeching against the tile. "You'd really do that, drag your own family into court over money." I stood, gathering the papers back into the folder. "This isn't about money. It's about truth. And yes, if I have to drag you through court to get it, I will. Because family doesn't mean covering up crimes. Not anymore." I walked out without touching the pasta, without looking back. My heart hammered, but it wasn't fear, it was clarity. The confrontation hadn't ended the war. It had only sounded the opening bell. The confrontation should have been enough to rattle them into silence, maybe even shame. But instead, it lit a fire. Within 2 days, whispers started circling through relatives, whispers that I was losing it, that grief had clouded my judgment since my husband died, that I was imagining signatures and inventing conspiracies against my own son. I knew exactly where the whispers came from. Lily had always been skilled at spinning stories. She turned every gathering into a stage, and now she cast herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law, suffering under the paranoia of an unstable mother. But lies rot fast when the air hits them, and air was about to rush in. David called me one morning, his voice sharper than usual. "We've received a response from their lawyer. They're claiming you authorized every transfer. They're even suggesting you gifted the money verbally. No paperwork, just your word." I closed my eyes. Verbal gifts, the oldest trick in the book. Hard to disprove, but harder to swallow. "So they want to make me look senile," I said flatly. "That's the angle," David agreed. "Undermine your credibility. Paint you as unreliable." But here's where it backfires. He emailed me an attachment. It was Claire's latest find, a string of emails between my son and Lily, pulled from an account they thought no one would ever trace. The subject lines were casual, but the content wasn't. Phrases like "Mom won't notice if we keep it under 15K, and "forge her signature again, she never checks." Each word was a nail in their coffin. My hands trembled as I scrolled. It wasn't the theft that made me tremble, it was the ease. The way my son, my own flesh, spoke of erasing me as if it were nothing more than balancing a checkbook. Still, evidence without exposure is just paper. I needed more than documents, I needed witnesses. That's when Claire brought me the neighbor, Mr. Anderson, who had once worked at the bank. He had seen my son there requesting cash withdrawals that didn't line up with the official records. He remembered the way Lily hovered whispering reminders as if coaching him. His memory wasn't perfect, but his testimony could open doors for further inquiry. Piece by piece, the puzzle filled in, but each new piece cut deeper. There was the loan they had taken out in my name, $50,000, masked as a co-signature. There was the property lien filed against the trust's assets without my consent. And then the darkest one, an application for life insurance, my name listed, but with Lily as the beneficiary. I read that document 3 times, my blood running cold. It was one thing to steal my money, another to forge my name. But to place themselves in line for my death benefit, that wasn't just greed, it was calculation. I met David the next day, placing the insurance document on his desk. He stared at it, then looked up at me. This isn't just civil anymore. This edges into criminal conspiracy." The word hung heavy in the room. Criminal. Conspiracy. Against me, their mother. I thought back to every excuse, every smile, every "we'll pay you back." They weren't mistakes. They were rehearsals. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. The air was still, my teacup cooling beside me. For the first time, I let myself grieve not just for the money, not for the trust, but for the son I thought I had. That boy was gone, buried under layers of lies I hadn't wanted to see. But grief hardened into resolve. If they wanted to paint me as unstable, then I would show them stability sharper than stone. If they wanted to silence me, then I would make my voice the one thing they couldn't ignore. I stacked the documents neatly, sliding them into a fresh folder. On the cover in my own handwriting, I wrote one word, case. Because that's what it was now. Not family drama, not misunderstanding, a case. And cases once opened don't close until justice is done. The escalation couldn't stay hidden forever. In small towns, secrets travel faster than the wind, and mine was about to break wide open. It happened at a cousin's birthday dinner, one of those obligatory gatherings where everyone pretends the family is whole. The house buzzed with conversation, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air. I arrived, a loan folder in my bag, not planning to stir the waters that night. But Lily spotted me from across the room, her smile sharp as glass. Everyone she called clinking her glass. "Let's welcome Mom, though. Lately, she's been accusing us of stealing. Can you imagine?" Laughter bubbled uneasy but present. My son smirked beside her, playing the victim perfectly. I could have walked away. I could have let them smear me. But silence only feeds lies. So I reached into my bag, pulled out 3 sheets of paper, and laid them on the table nearest the cake. Imagine it, I said. Why imagine when you can read? The room quieted. Curious relatives gathered, leaning over the papers, copies of the forged transfer, the hotel receipt, and the life insurance application. Whispers turned into gasps. One aunt pressed a hand to her mouth. My son moved quickly, snatching at the papers. "These are fake!" he shouted, his voice cracking. But his reaction said more than the evidence. He was panicked, cornered. Lily tried to salvage the moment, her tone syrupy. "Don't let her confuse you. She's struggling, you all know that. Grief makes people—" "Grief didn't forge my signature," I cut in. My voice carried stronger than I expected. "Grief didn't take loans in my name. Grief didn't file for life insurance with Lily as the beneficiary." The room erupted. Cousins whispered, eyes darting. Uncles shook their heads. In a family where appearances mattered more than truth, I had shattered the mask. But the real shift came not from the relatives. It came from Grandpa, my late husband's father, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He was 90, frail, but his voice cut through the noise like thunder. "I built that trust with my son," he said, pointing a trembling finger at my son. "Not for you to squander, not for you to betray her. I will testify. I will tell any court what it was meant for." The room froze. Even Lily's smirk collapsed. My son's shoulders sagged as if the weight finally pressed too heavy. He tried to laugh it off, but no one laughed with him. The power had shifted. After that night, the whispers reversed. Neighbors called me quietly, offering support. One even confessed she'd overheard Lily bragging at the salon about finally getting Mom out of the way. The tide was turning, and not in their favor. David filed the motions the next morning, attaching the insurance application and Claire's findings. With Grandpa's statement added, the court froze the trust immediately. Their accounts bled dry overnight. Claire called me chuckling. I checked. Their credit cards bounced at dinner. Couldn't even pay for dessert. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. For the first time, they felt the same helplessness they had inflicted on me. Yet even as victory loomed, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange, quiet sorrow. Watching my son unravel in front of the family had been necessary, but it was also the final nail in the coffin of the relationship we once had. That night, sitting in bed, I thought about power. Real power isn't shouting louder or spending more. Real power is truth laid bare in front of witnesses. And once it's out, no smear campaign, no whispered lie can bury it again. I closed the folder, placed it on my nightstand, and whispered to myself, "It's begun." The war was no longer hidden. It was public, and now the whole family was watching which side would stand when the dust settled. The Monday after the family dinner, David and I walked into the courthouse. The marble floors echoed under our steps, each sound reminding me this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was official. David carried the evidence in a neat leather briefcase. I carried nothing but my resolve. Inside, the hearing began quietly, but the air pulsed with tension. My son sat across the aisle, his suit a size too big, his eyes darting. Lily perched beside him, her blouse crisp, her smirk returning like armor. Their lawyer, a young man with slicked hair, whispered furiously as the judge entered. David spoke first, calm, measured, unshakable. He laid out the forged documents, the email trail, the insurance application. He presented the witness statements, Grandpa's testimony notarized and firm. Each exhibit was numbered, every fact chained to the next like links in iron. Their lawyer objected, often claims of hearsay, claims of exaggeration. But every time the judge's gavel silenced him. Then came the turning point. Claire, the investigator, took the stand. She described following them, photographing their hotel visits, pulling bank receipts that contradicted their stories. She spoke of the account they thought was hidden, the emails sent carelessly, the paper trail impossible to erase. Lily shifted uncomfortably. My son clenched his jaw. For the first time, their confidence cracked under fluorescent lights. The judge leaned forward. Forgery, fraudulent loans, unauthorized withdrawals from a trust, and now a life insurance policy signed under false pretenses. His voice hardened. "This isn't a family squabble. This is criminal." The courtroom hushed. The word landed like a verdict before the verdict. Their lawyer scrambled. "Your Honor, my clients admit mistakes, but they were driven by desperation, not malice." "Desperation doesn't forge signatures," the judge interrupted. "Desperation doesn't fabricate beneficiaries." He turned his gaze on my son. "Do you have anything to say?" For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might show the boy I once knew, but instead he muttered, "She was supposed to help us. She always helped us." The judge's expression hardened further. "Help is voluntary, theft is not." The gavel struck. The trust remained frozen. The court ordered a forensic audit of all transactions tied to my name. Criminal referrals would be sent to the district attorney. As we left the courtroom, reporters lingered on the steps. Someone had leaked the story, probably a relative hungry for attention. Microphones angled toward me, voices shouting questions. "Did your own son forge your signature? Do you believe they planned to profit from your death? What does this mean for the trust?" I didn't stop. David guided me through the noise, his hand firm at my elbow. "Say nothing yet," he murmured. "Truth speaks louder in silence right now." But I saw Lily cornered by the same microphones, trying to smile, trying to spin. "It's all a misunderstanding," she insisted. "We love Mom, we'd never." Her words drowned in the flash of cameras and the chill of doubt written across every reporter's face. That night, David called with the DA's preliminary response. "They're opening a case file. It won't be quick, but it's moving. You need to be ready for depositions, maybe even trial." I stared out my window at the dark street, ready. I was more than ready. In the weeks that followed, accounts were seized. Creditors called them daily. The house they flaunted began to crack. Foreclosure whispers circled, neighbors watched. The power they wielded with money and manipulation drained away, leaving only shadows of entitlement. And me, I wasn't triumphant. I was steady. Every letter from the court, every call from David reminded me that truth has a rhythm. It may stumble, but it marches forward. For years, I had been the silent benefactor, the one who kept the wheels turning while they squandered. Now the silence was broken, and the law itself was echoing the words I had whispered in my kitchen weeks before. This is a case, and cases end with justice. The courtroom battle was only the beginning. The true reckoning came later, face to face, when there were no lawyers to shield him and no judge to silence me. It was late afternoon when I walked up the cracked driveway of their house. The grass was overgrown, the paint peeling, a sign of bills unpaid, of a life unraveling. Lily's car sat lopsided in the yard, one tire flat. He opened the door before I knocked. My son. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt, a far cry from the confident man who once sneered at me across a kitchen table. He looked smaller, diminished. "What do you want?" His voice was hoarse, but still laced with defiance. I stepped inside, the air thick with stale food and despair. "I came to end this," I said simply. Lily appeared from the living room, arms crossed. "End what you've already ruined us. Isn't that enough?" I laid the folder on their chipped coffee table. Not the whole case, just the essentials, the forged transfer, the emails, the insurance policy. Their sins condensed into paper. "This isn't about ruin," I said. "It's about truth. You wanted me erased. You wanted my signature, my trust, even my death benefit. But you forgot one thing: truth leaves trails, and I followed every one." My son sank onto the couch, his hands clutching his head. "We just wanted a chance," he muttered. "You always held the power. We thought—" His voice broke. "We thought if we pushed you'd give in like always." "That was your mistake," I said quietly. "You mistook love for weakness." Lily's eyes flashed. "So what now? You drag us through court until we have nothing left. Is that justice to you?" "No," I replied. "Justice is you facing what you chose. Forgery, fraud, lies. Justice is your daughter growing up knowing her parents weren't victims but criminals. And justice is me walking out of here with my head high while you hide from neighbors who already know the truth." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He finally looked up, tears streaking his face. For the first time in years, I saw something human in his eyes, not remorse but recognition. He understood it was over. "I can't stop the DA," I continued. "I can't stop the auditors or the banks or the judge. This has a life of its own now. You set it in motion the moment you forged my name." Lily turned away, her shoulders shaking. My son whispered, "Mom, please." But the word died before it could become an apology. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. "You chose this path," I said, "and now you walk it, alone." I left without slamming the door, without shouting. Power doesn't need volume, it only needs truth. Outside, the air felt cleaner. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their eyes following me, not them. For years, I had been invisible, the quiet provider. Now, I was visible not as their victim, but as the one who stood. That night, David called with news the DA had filed official charges: fraud, forgery, attempted insurance scam. Court dates would follow. Trials, consequences. I listened, then set the phone down. My heart wasn't light, but it was steady. The final confrontation hadn't been a battle of fists or screams. It had been the quiet moment when I looked my son in the eye and saw not a boy, not even a man, but the hollow shell of choices he couldn't undo. And I knew then the war was finished. The rest was paperwork, hearings, signatures stamped by others. For me, the end had already come when I walked away folder in hand and left them to face what they had become. When the charges became official, I expected chaos. What I didn't expect was the quiet. No more phone calls at midnight, no more pounding at my door. The silence was almost unnerving, like walking into a house after a storm has torn the roof away. The DA's office moved quickly. Depositions, audits, sworn statements, it became a machine I simply stepped into when summoned. David guided me through each stage. Claire provided every document like clockwork. Grandpa, frail but fierce, signed his testimony with hands that shook but words that did not. The trust once bleeding from every side was stabilized. Accounts frozen, fraudulent loans flagged. The bank even issued apologies, embarrassed that their safeguards had been bypassed. For the first time in years, I could look at a balance sheet and see order instead of theft. But rebuilding wasn't just financial, it was personal. I walked through my house with new eyes. The kitchen table where I had signed checks at their insistence gone. I replaced it with a sturdy oak one, no papers allowed on its surface, only meals. The couch where my son once sprawled, demanding help, replaced with 2 armchairs facing a bookshelf. I filled that shelf with law guides, memoirs of survivors, and a few photo albums I once hid in shame. Neighbors came by timid at first, then openly supportive. One brought me soup, another mowed my lawn. They didn't ask for details they already knew. They offered presence, and sometimes that was enough. Yet rebuilding also meant facing the emptiness left behind. Even when justice is served, blood ties severed leave scars. I still caught myself staring at the phone, expecting his number to flash. I still dreamt some nights of him as a boy, muddy shoes wide grin, calling me mom without malice. Those mornings I sat with tea until the ache dulled. I told myself grief and resolve could coexist. Both were part of me now. Out of that ache came an idea. The trust had always been meant for legacy, not just wealth, but meaning. My son and Lily had tried to twist it into their personal fountain. I would reshape it into what it should have been, a foundation for students. David drew up the paperwork. We named it the Anderson Foundation for Integrity and Learning. Scholarships for first-generation college students, aid for those studying law or finance, the very tools that had saved me. I attended the first award ceremony, quietly watching a young woman step onto the stage, clutching her scholarship letter with trembling hands. Her smile lit the room. That moment was more powerful than any gavel, any frozen account. It was proof that my legacy was no longer chained to betrayal. In the process, I found allies beyond my legal team. A retired teacher offered to mentor applicants. A local judge sent a donation. Even Grandpa, though his health faltered, recorded a message for the foundation. Integrity is the only inheritance worth leaving. His voice cracked, but his eyes burned bright. The press, once hungry for scandal, began to shift the narrative. Articles no longer framed me as a victim, but as a survivor who turned grief into action. Reporters asked for interviews. I declined most, but once I spoke. I said only this: love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. And surrender feeds greed. Draw your lines, hold them. That's how dignity survives. The applause that followed wasn't for me, it was for every person who had ever been used, lied to, or erased by their own kin. By the time the trial date loomed, I no longer felt consumed by it. Whether they pled guilty or fought to the bitter end, my path was set. My life had rebuilt itself brick by brick, not in grand gestures, but in small choices: a new table, a locked folder, a scholarship handed to a student who would never forge a signature. Justice had begun in the courtroom, but rebuilding happened in my home, my community, and my heart. The trial came and went like the turning of a season. The outcome was predictable. Guilty pleas negotiated down probation laced with restitution reputations shredded in the court of public opinion. My son and Lily shrank from view, their names whispered with pity instead of pride. But for me, the true ending had already arrived long before the judge pronounced sentence. It came in the quiet of my own home, in the steady rhythm of rebuilding, in the calm acceptance that family can wound deeper than strangers, and yet dignity can heal faster than revenge. I sat one evening on my porch, tea steaming in my hands, the sky bleeding into dusk. For the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing against my chest. The oak tree in the yard swayed gently, its branches scarred from storms, but still reaching upward. I thought, that is me. Bent, scarred, but upright. The Anderson Foundation held its second ceremony that month. Another group of students faces alight with possibility stood clutching letters of support, not chains of debt. One girl whispered to me afterward, "You believed in me when no one else did." She didn't know the irony that once I had believed in someone who betrayed me completely. Yet her words filled the void that betrayal left. Neighbors still asked how I felt. Did I hate my son? Did I regret the fight? My answer never changed. No. Hate is a second prison. I walked out of the first one. I won't build another. In quiet moments, memories still rose. His laughter as a child, his hand slipping into mine at the fair. The way he once said thanks Mom before greed rewrote his script. I let those memories pass without bitterness. They belonged to a boy who no longer existed. The moral, I realized, wasn't just about law or legacy. It was about boundaries. For years, I had thought sacrifice was love, that silence was peace. I was wrong. Real love requires lines drawn firm, not for cruelty, but for respect. Without those lines, love curdles into entitlement, and entitlement breeds betrayal. So this is what I want anyone listening, especially those over 50, those who have given more than they've kept, to remember. Dignity is not negotiable. Money can be stolen, signatures can be forged, even families can fracture. But dignity, if you hold it guard, it claim, it cannot be taken. At my age, I no longer measure life in decades ahead, but in days well spent. And these days, I spend building something lasting. Not mansions or cars or fleeting luxuries, but scholarships, opportunities, truths carved in stone rather than whispered in shadows. If betrayal has touched you, and I know for many watching it has heard this, you are not alone. Your story, like mine, can bend toward justice. You may not erase the scars, but you can repurpose them into strength. One evening, Grandpa passed away peacefully. We laid him to rest beneath the same oak tree. His last recorded words for the foundation still echo in my mind. Integrity is the only inheritance worth leaving. I etched those words onto a plaque in his honor. I no longer wait for apologies that will never come. I no longer measure my worth by whether my son calls me Mom with affection or disdain. My worth is already written on scholarship checks, on court orders that bear the truth, on the quiet dignity of a woman who chose not to surrender. As I close this chapter, my tea cooling beside me, I whisper a final thought to the wind. Legacy isn't inheritance. It's dignity. That is what I leave behind. That is what no betrayal can erase.